The crack of the bat against leather echoed across the dusty field. And for a moment, just a moment, the Japanese prisoners forgot they were supposed to be dead. They had been taught that capture meant the end of everything: honor, family, life itself. They had been taught that Americans would torture them, starve them, use their bones for souvenirs. But here they stood on a summer afternoon in 1945, watching a baseball soar into the Hawaiian sky, and their minds could not hold both truths at once. Lieutenant Yamada felt the rough wooden handle of the bat in his hands, heavier than he remembered from his school days in Tokyo. The American guards were cheering, not mocking, not laughing at him, but cheering the way his teammates used to cheer when he was 16, and the cherry blossoms fell like snow onto the playing field. He had prepared himself for death. He had not prepared himself for this strange mercy that felt more crushing than any cruelty. 3 weeks earlier, these men had arrived at the camp expecting darkness. The trucks had rolled through gates topped with wire, and each man carried the weight of his shame like stones in his stomach. In Japanese military teaching, a soldier who surrendered was already dead to his family. His name would be removed from the family register. His mother would hold a funeral with an empty coffin. They knew this, and they walked into the camp as ghosts, men who no longer existed. The guards pointed them toward wooden buildings, and they waited for the beatings to begin. But the beatings never came. Instead, there was rice. Not the handful of moldy grain they expected, but bowls of white rice, still steaming, with pieces of fish and vegetables mixed in. Private Tanaka stared at his portion, unable to lift his chopsticks. His mind told him it must be poisoned. Why else would enemies feed him better than his own army had fed him in the final months? The scent of the food made his stomach twist with hunger, but shame was stronger than hunger. He had been taught that he deserved to starve. The American camp commander was a large man named Colonel Davis who had played baseball in college. He walked through the camp on that first morning, not with the sword of a conqueror, but with a clipboard and a tired smile. Through a translator, he explained the rules: work details in the morning, meals 3 times a day, letters home once a month, and on Sundays, if they wanted, baseball. The translator, a second-generation Japanese-American from California, repeated these words twice because the prisoners' faces showed no understanding, not of the English, which most didn't speak, but of the very idea itself. Sergeant Ito had been captured after his plane crashed into the ocean. For 2 days he floated on debris, drinking seawater and waiting for death. When the American ship pulled him from the waves, he tried to fight them with his bare hands, weak as he was. They tied him down and gave him water. Clean, cool water that tasted like mercy he didn't deserve. Now, 3 weeks later, he stood in the food line holding a metal tray, and the American server smiled at him. Just smiled, as if he were human. The smile hurt more than any blow. It was not the wire fences that broke them, but the ordinary kindness. It was not the guards with rifles, but the guard who shared his cigarettes. It was not the imprisonment that shattered their understanding of the world, but the doctor who treated their infected wounds with the same care he gave to American soldiers. Everything they had been taught about Americans, about honor, about death and shame, all of it crumbled like old paper in the rain. The baseball equipment arrived on a Thursday. Boxes of it donated by churches in Honolulu. Gloves that smelled of leather oil. Bats of different weights and sizes. Balls still white and new, their red stitching bright as fresh blood. Colonel Davis had the equipment laid out on tables in the main yard. He didn't order anyone to play. He simply left it there, like bait for something he thought might still be alive in these defeated men. For 3 days, no one touched it. The prisoners walked past the equipment with their eyes down, as if it might disappear if they didn't look at it directly. Baseball had been Japan's game too, beloved and played in every school, every town. But that was before. That was when they were people with names and families and futures. Now they were something else, something less than human in their own eyes, and games were for the living. Young Private Matsui broke first. He had been 17 when he joined the army, 18 when captured. He picked up a glove when he thought no one was watching, slipped it onto his left hand. The leather was soft and broken in by someone else's palm. He squeezed it closed, and the sound it made, that soft pop of leather meeting leather, pulled something loose in his chest. Tears came before he could stop them. Not tears of sadness, but of something more confusing. The glove made him remember being human. Others saw him crying and looked away, but they understood. One by one, when the guards weren't watching though, the guards were always watching and simply pretended not to. The prisoners began to touch the equipment. They picked up bats and took practice swings. They tossed balls back and forth, just small tosses at first, as if testing whether their bodies still remembered how to play. Lieutenant Yamada had been a good player in university. He found himself teaching the younger men how to hold the bat, how to watch the pitcher's arm. The words came naturally, the same words his coach had used 10 years ago. Keep your eye on the ball. Feel the weight shift from your back foot to your front. Simple words that had nothing to do with war or shame or the empire that was falling apart across the ocean. Just the ancient conversation between teacher and student, the passing of knowledge that needed no nation or flag. The Americans watched from a distance at first. Then some began to offer advice through gestures and broken Japanese phrases they'd learned. A guard named Tommy showed Private Suzuki how to adjust his grip for more power. The corrections were gentle, respectful, the way you might help a younger brother. Suzuki wanted to hate this enemy who was being kind to him. His mind said he should hate, but his heart was tired of hate, tired of fear, tired of the war that lived in his bones even though the fighting had stopped. When they finally played that first game, it was Americans against Japanese, but not the way the war had been. Colonel Davis pitched for the American team, throwing easy balls that begged to be hit. He wanted them to remember what it felt like to succeed at something, to hear the crack of contact, to run. The Japanese team had no uniforms, just their prisoner clothes with numbers on the back. But when Yamada hit that first real solid hit, when the ball flew over the second baseman's head and he ran to first base with his teammates shouting encouragement, something shifted in the air of the camp. The game was clumsy and beautiful. Men who had tried to kill each other 6 months ago now argued about whether a runner was safe or out. They used hand signals and the few words they shared. Fair ball, strike, safe, the universal language of baseball that needed no translation. When Private Tanaka hit a home run, the ball clearing the makeshift fence they'd set up, the American catcher patted him on the back as he crossed home plate. Just a simple pat, the kind teammates give each other. Tanaka's body went rigid. No American had touched him except to capture him or treat his wounds. This was different. This was the touch of equals. They played for 3 hours that first day. The sun was brutal, and they had no shade in the field. Sweat soaked through their clothes. Dust covered everything: their faces, their hands, the balls that turned brown after a few innings. But they kept playing. It was as if stopping would mean returning to the reality of what they were. Prisoners who had shamed their families, men without countries, soldiers who had failed in the most fundamental way a Japanese soldier could fail. They had lived when they should have died. After the game, in the barracks, the men were quiet, but it was a different quiet than before. Corporal Nakamura sat on his bunk, rubbing the soreness from his shoulder. He had pitched 4 innings, and his arm ached in a good way, the way it used to ache after practice in high school. Across from him, Private Endo was drawing the baseball field in the dirt floor with a stick, showing others where they should position themselves next time. Next time. The phrase itself was hope. The letters home were the hardest part. They were allowed to write, but most didn't know what to say. How do you tell your mother you're alive when she's already mourned you? How do you explain that the enemies feed you, let you play games, treat you like humans when your own culture says you're no longer human? Yamada wrote 5 different versions before settling on simple facts. I am alive. I am healthy. The war is over. He couldn't write about the baseball. It felt too much like betrayal, enjoying something while his country suffered. But the games continued. Every Sunday, sometimes Wednesdays too. The teams got better, more organized. Some of the Japanese prisoners who had never played before learned from the ones who had. They developed strategies, signals, inside jokes that crossed language barriers. When it rained and turned the field to mud, they played anyway. sliding into bases and coming up covered in earth, laughing. The laughter was the most shocking thing. They had forgotten they could laugh. It was not just baseball that changed them, but what baseball represented. In the game, there were rules that both sides followed. There was fairness. A strike was a strike whether thrown by an American or Japanese hand. A good play was appreciated regardless of who made it. The game created a space where they could be something other than enemies or prisoners. They could be players. Sergeant Ito wrote to his wife after the third game. He told her about the baseball, finally. He wrote, "I cannot explain it well, but when I hold the bat, I remember who I was before all of this. Not a soldier, not a prisoner, but just a man who once played catch with his son in the yard." He sealed the letter knowing she might never receive it, knowing she might have already remarried thinking him dead, but writing it made him feel human. The American guards started learning Japanese words from the games. Yoshi, for nice. Ganbat, for do your best. They shouted these encouragements during play, their pronunciation terrible but their intention clear. The prisoners taught them how to say it correctly, and this teaching, this small exchange of language and culture, felt like building a tiny bridge across an ocean of misunderstanding. There was one guard, a young man from Iowa named Russell, who had lost his brother at Pearl Harbor. Everyone knew this. The Japanese prisoners expected him to hate them, and maybe he did, somewhere deep in his heart. But he was the one who brought new balls when the old ones fell apart. He was the one who found extra gloves when more prisoners wanted to play. During one game, when Private Matsui made an excellent diving catch, Russell stood up and applauded. Real applause, not mockery. Matsui didn't know what to do with his hands, with his face, with the feeling that spread through his chest like warm water. The food changed meaning too. It was no longer the enemy's charity but fuel for the next game. They needed strength to play well. They needed energy to run the bases. Eating became less about shame and more about preparation. The rice tasted better when you knew you'd need it for 9 innings under the sundae. The fish gave you protein for your muscles. The vegetables kept you healthy enough to play. Some of the men started doing exercises in the morning, push-ups, running in place, stretches they remembered from military training but now used for a different purpose. They were training not for war but for the next Sunday game. Their bodies, which had been instruments of violence and then objects of shame, became again just bodies that could run and throw and catch. It was not the grand gestures that healed them, but the accumulated weight of small normalcies. The way Colonel Davis asked Yamada for advice on his pitching form. The way the American team celebrated when they won, but also helped the Japanese players improve for next time. The way disagreements about rules were settled with discussion, not force. Each small moment added up to something larger, a quiet revolution in how they understood the world and their place in it. The war ended officially in August, but in the camp, it had been ending every Sunday for weeks. Each game unwound a little more of the hatred and fear that war had wrapped around their hearts. Each time they shook hands after a game, a Western custom they adopted naturally, they were agreeing to something unspoken. That maybe enemies were just men on different sides. That maybe honor could be found in how you played, not just in how you died. That maybe, just maybe, they could go home and live with what they had done and what they had failed to do. Private Tanaka had a photograph from before the war. Him in his high school baseball uniform, serious and young, holding a bat like a samurai sword. He kept it hidden for months, ashamed to remember that boy who thought he understood honor and duty. But after 2 months of Sunday games, he took it out and showed it to Tommy, the American guard. Tommy pulled out his own photograph him in his minor league uniform, same serious pose, same young certainty. They looked at the 2 photos side by side, 2 boys who became soldiers who became something else here on this dusty field. They couldn't speak each other's language well, but they understood each other perfectly in that moment. The prisoners who went home carried these memories differently than their other war memories. The battles faded or sharpened into nightmares. The hunger and fear became stories they might or might not tell. But the baseball games remained whole and puzzling. Like stones in their pockets they would pull out years later and examine, still not quite believing they were real. How do you explain to your son that the enemy taught you to hold a bat properly? How do you tell your grandson that some of your best war memories were of playing games with the men you were supposed to hate? Lieutenant Yamada returned to Tokyo in 1946. The city was rubble and reconstruction. Everyone focused on survival and forgetting. He didn't talk about the camp for 20 years. Then one day, his daughter asked him to coach her school's baseball team. Standing on that field, teaching young girls how to watch the pitcher's arm, how to shift their weight, he heard Colonel Davis's voice mixed with his own. He was passing on something he learned from an enemy who had refused to be his enemy. The girls didn't know. How could they? But every time one of them made a good play, Yamada felt that bridge built of leather and wood and simple human kindness stretching across the Pacific. Years later, some of them would meet again. American guards and Japanese prisoners, old men now, gathering to remember not the war but the games. They would bring their grandchildren and try to explain what it meant, this strange peace they found in the middle of captivity. But no explanation was quite enough. You had to be there. You had to feel the bat in your hands while your country was dying. You had to hear your enemy cheer when you rounded third base. You had to understand that everything you believed could be wrong, and that this wrongness could save you. The games taught them that peace was not the absence of conflict, but the agreement to rules. Not the erasure of difference, but the respect for it. Not forgetting what had happened, but choosing to play anyway. Every crack of the bat was a small rebellion against the idea that enemies must always be enemies. Every cheer across team lines was a vote for a different kind of world. Every Sunday game was practice for a future where former enemies might simply be opponents, and opponents might, on a good day with the sun shining and the field dry, even become friends. It was not what peace was supposed to look like. They had expected treaties and formalities, bowing and careful distance. They had not expected baseball. They had not expected to stand in a field with their enemies and argue about whether a ball was fair or foul. They had not expected to care who won. They had not expected to find, in the middle of their greatest shame, this unexpected grace. But there it was, every Sunday, waiting for them in the form of a simple game that asked nothing of them but to play. The last game before the camp closed was the best they ever played. 9 full innings. The score tied until the bottom of the 9th when Private Suzuki, who had never played before coming to the camp, hit a line drive that brought in the winning run. Both teams celebrated. It made no sense and perfect sense at the same time. They had all won something harder to name than a baseball game. They had won back pieces of themselves they thought were lost forever. When they finally went home, when the ships took them back to Japan, or the trains took the Americans back to their towns, they carried this contradiction inside them. They had been enemies who played baseball together. They had been prisoners who were treated as humans. They had expected death and found innings instead, expected torture and found teammates. The world was larger and stranger than they had been taught. People were more complicated than war allowed them to be. And sometimes, on the most ordinary Sunday, with the sun high and the field ready, peace looked exactly like a baseball game between men who had forgotten they were supposed to hate each other. And there were thousands more stories like this, waiting to be remembered.